Thank you. So my name is Mikko, and I hunt hackers for a living. That's what I do. I hunt hackers for a living. The evil kind of hackers, the bad hackers, the criminals, the people who want to steal our money, who want to infect our systems, the people who run botnets and who launch distributed denial of service attacks. And I've learned a couple of things while I've been doing this job for quite a long time. One thing that I've learned is that we really have to understand our enemy if we want to have any kind of chances of securing our devices and securing our networks. Because it is quite different to try to secure your network against an attack launched by a hacktivist gang who just wants to make you look bad or embarrass you because of something that your organization has done. And it's quite different to protect your network against a criminal attacker who wants to collect credit card numbers or steal valuable data. And once again, quite different to protect your network against a nation state running an attack run by an intelligence agency because they want to spy on your country or on your organization. And nowadays we even have to think about extremists and terrorists because Islamic State is the first extremist or terrorist organization which has some level of capability of doing offensive cyber operations. And not all of these groups are against all organizations. So it's really important to understand who are the different players and which of those players might be interested in you or in your organization. Another thing I've learned is that complexity is the enemy of security. Complexity is the enemy of security. The more complex systems we have, the more complex our networks, the more complex our organizations, the harder it is to defend it. How many of the Fortune 500 are hacked right now? The answer? 500. All of them. Why? Because Fortune 500, they're all massively large companies with massively large networks. And when you have massively large networks, there's no way to defend every single part of it at all times. There is a breach in some part of the network of every single Fortune 500 company right now. There is no way of fighting that because there are so many attackers, and when your network is large enough, you cannot defend all of it. So we have to build resilience into our systems if we want to be able to continue operating even when we are under attack. And another thing I've learned is that security is getting better, but we keep running into the same problems again and again. I'll give you an example of that. I have here a piece of malware, an old piece of malware. This is the AIDS information Trojan. The AIDS information Trojan from 1989. Not 1999, 1989, from the 80s, all right? An old one. AIDS information Trojan was the very first ransom Trojan we ever found. Ransom Trojans are the kind of malware which will take your data as a hostage and ask you to pay to get your own data back. AIDS information Trojan claimed to be a useful application, a medical application, which you would install on your computer, then it would rank your risk of getting infected by HIV. And HIV was a big deal in 1989. That's when it was first in the news. However, if you did not read the end user license agreement, which we of course never read, you would miss the part in which this application would tell you that if you don't pay for the app, after a couple of days, it will force you to pay by locking your computer and showing you this screen where it demands you to send $189 to a PO box in Panama to unlock your computer. All right, so this is 1989. From 1989 to a Trojan that we found last month. This is the Petya MBR Trojan, found last month. This is 1989, this is 2016. There's 27 years between these two malware. They both are ransom Trojans. They both lock you out of your own computer. They both ask you to pay money to get your own files back. They both encrypt the master boot record to prevent your PC from rebooting. They both encrypt the file indexes of your own files to prevent you from recovering your files. 27 years. Everything old is new again. We keep running into the same problems. So how do you get infected by Petya? Petya is actually made by a cybercrime gang operating from Russia, we believe from Moscow. They call themselves the Janus Cybercrime Solutions, Inc. That's their name for the gang. And the way they infect your system is through email attachments. There's two main ways of getting infected on your systems. Browsing the web, getting hit by exploit kits because you have an outdated flash in your browser or something like that, or clicking on attachments in emails. And the email that burns you with Petya looks like this. Thank you for your payment. Thank you for your business. Your invoice for $802 is attached. And you haven't ordered anything. So, what's this? Somebody has stolen your credit card, maybe. Better take a look at the invoice. When you open up the invoice, it actually won't open up because it's a protected document. It's a protected document. It's protected by Microsoft Word. It's encrypted somehow. That's what it says. It's protected by Microsoft Office. Please enable editing and content to see this document. And if you actually follow the instructions it gives to you, you end up enabling macros inside Microsoft Office, which results in your system getting infected by the ransom Trojan. We keep seeing this trick happen over and over again. And this is another example of old stuff coming back to bite us. These are basically macroviruses using macros inside Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And this was a problem we had in 1995. Some of you might remember macroviruses like Melissa or I Love You, which went around the world in 1995. And they were macroviruses spreading inside macros of Word and Excel. It might be an Excel document like this. When you open it, you can't see anything because the content is blurred, and then it explains to you that it's blurred because security. And if you want to see the blurred content, you have to click the Enable Content button. And that's the button you don't want to press. You don't want to enable content. If you leave today with one thing you've learned, I hope it would be that you don't click the Enable Content button. Because when you do, then you get hit with a Trojan. And today it is mostly ransom Trojans. If it's not Petya, then it might be, for example, HydraCrypt. This is HydraCrypt. Not coming from Moscow, this one is coming from St. Petersburg. From Russia anyway. Many of these are coming from Russia or Ukraine or Romania, Eastern Europe, and so on. And the thing about ransom Trojans is that if you actually follow the instructions that they give to you, if you actually pay the ransom, they will actually deliver. They will actually give you your files back. So at least they are honest criminals. Now the reason why they are honest, the reason why they deliver, is that these guys need a good reputation. They need a good reputation because it's quite obvious. If you get hit by this, or let's, for example, take a look at this. This is TeslaCrypt. If you get hit by TeslaCrypt, if you get this on your screen, what will you do? Well, obviously, you will Google for TeslaCrypt help or something like that. And you will find earlier victims. You will find victims from last week who have posted online about their experience. And they will tell you that, yeah, I got hit with TeslaCrypt. It used RSA 2048 encryption algorithm to encrypt my files. That's uncrackable. I couldn't figure out any way of recovering it, so I paid the ransom, which was 2.5 bitcoins. And they sent me a program right away, which worked very quickly, and I got all my files back. They supported me, nice guys. Would recommend. So that's why they deliver. And it's also important to understand that these gangs behind ransom Trojans, these are businessmen. They do consider things like return on investment, or things like, well, if you think about it, how do you make money? I mean, you can try stealing data and then selling that data. But most of the victims for ransom Trojans are actually consumers and home users. Yes, we see companies and enterprises getting hit by these regularly, but most of the victims are home users. So the data they're stealing, or that they could steal, is basically your photos and your email history. And that's most valuable to you. So they're selling it to the party that will pay the best for the data, which in this case is the victim itself. So it's like basic business logic here. Another thing which is quite interesting is that there's quite clear competition between these gangs that manufacture ransom Trojans. Indeed, many of them do come from Russia or Ukraine, but it is a little bit more global than that. For example, the KRSW Trojan is coming from Japan and targets Japanese victims. And it's interesting to see that some of these Trojan gangs are now moving into new platforms because there's so much competition for customers or victims within Windows platforms. So last month we found the Keranger Trojan, which is the first ransom Trojan targeting Macs, targeting OS X systems. Now Mac market share of computers is just 7 or 8%. It's not a very large market share from a business point of view, but there's no competition. For these guys, they are the only ones targeting Macs. So it makes perfect sense, perfect business sense to target Macs. There's another interesting thing about the Keranger Trojan, which is that it tries to find the time machine servers in your network to encrypt them as well. And time machine servers are your backup servers for Mac systems. So it tries finding your backups and encrypting them as well. I mean, the obvious way of recovering from ransom Trojans instead of paying the money, which we really don't recommend. We don't recommend anybody paying any money to these clowns, but of course some people do because they don't have the backups. But Keranger thinks about that as well. It tries encrypting your backups. And we have a technical term for ransom Trojans that encrypt your backups. We call them a dick move. So how big is this problem? It's pretty big. In fact, I mentioned this problem last time I spoke at Thinking Digital 4 years ago. And I had one screenshot of an early ransom Trojan at the time, I guess, which wasn't yet using Bitcoin as the money transfer mechanism. Because Bitcoin really is the mega trend that made ransom Trojans as big a problem it is. You can see here, this one is explaining to you to send Bitcoins to this wallet address, and it lists a wallet address uniquely made for you. And the thing about Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is based on blockchain, and blockchain is based on a public ledger. And when I say public, I mean public. I mean every single transaction in the blockchain is public. Any one of you can download the Bitcoin blockchain today, all of it, and look at every single transaction done in the Bitcoin blockchain since it was created in 2009. And this means that we can actually go and look if anybody sends money to that address. It's public, right? Which means we can track, at least to some level, the money movements in the Bitcoin network for ransom Trojan gangs. Bitcoin makes it sort of public because we don't really see who's moving money, who's receiving money, but we see amounts of money. And that's interesting because, for example, the crypto locker Trojan has been using a central wallet for the last 2 years. Every victim gets a unique address, but then they move the money to one central wallet. And over the last 2 years, over 300 million euros have gone through that wallet. Now, if that would be a startup with revenues of that kind, we would consider it a unicorn, right? A cybercrime unicorn. A cybercrime unicorn. That's kind of weird. Plus, they don't have to pay tax. You know, when you're criminal, you don't have to pay tax. That's how it works. That's the idea. Another thing that's changing around us very quickly right now is IoT. Internet of Things, connected devices. Internet of Things, the idea that everything that we use to connect to electricity We will in the future connect to the electricity grid and to the internet grid. And there is no device small enough that it wouldn't end up online eventually. Yes, our TVs and our washing machines are already online, but soon it will cover everything else as well, including our microwave ovens and our goddamn toasters and everything. And at the very same time, we have the same revolution happening in industrial settings. There we call it ICS, Industrial Control Systems. Everything is being connected to the internet and controlled with computers, with software, with technology, and everything is online. Now, I've been working with computer security for a long while, and fairly often when I speak about the new kinds of risks that internet has exposed us to, people come to me afterwards telling about how it's shocking and how they will never go online again, or how they will never do shopping online again, or something like that. And that's not really what I'm trying to say. I think internet is great. I think internet has brought us much more good than bad. Yes, it clearly has exposed us to new kinds of risks. It has exposed us to criminals who, before the internet, could not reach us because they're far away. Now they can reach us through the internet. But clearly, the internet has brought us so much good, so much business, so much connectivity, so much entertainment, that the downsides pale in comparison. And I'd like to think that the same thing will apply to the Internet of Things. I hope the same thing will apply to the Internet of Things. But the thing that worries me is that nowadays when we just do routine scans of the internet, because we regularly scan the whole internet, well, basically the public IPv4 address space, we find stuff online that really shouldn't be online. Like, power generators connected to the internet with their control panel exposed with no username or password. So, anybody, you can go and look at this and click at the buttons. And this is somewhere in Germany. My German isn't great, but I can understand motor start, motor stop, motor not out. Or you'll find things like these. This is a swimming pool, Olympic-size swimming pool from a university in Canada. And that's the control panel, exposed to the internet with no username or password, including options like acid pump. And this is a bad idea. And then we find things like these. This, my friends, is 16 hospital beds exposed to the internet with no username, no password. The beds with charge on them have a live patient on the bed. This one isn't doing too well. And this then gets us to the next question, that, who might be targeting things like these? Because these are clearly not traditional computers. This is infrastructure, in some cases, critical infrastructure. Now, by far the biggest problem we have today are the attacks done by criminal attackers, the ones who try to make money. On an average day, we receive around 350,000 malware sample submissions to our labs at F-Secure. We estimate that over 95% of those are coming from criminal attackers, the ones who try to make money. And if you're trying to make money, hospital beds is not your primary target. You could probably figure out ways of making money by hacking hospital beds, but there are probably easier ways of making money. So we probably have to look at different kinds of attackers, including the extremists, and maybe including things like foreign militaries, when we start to look at attacks against critical infrastructure. It's not the prime target of criminals, but it is worrying. And we've all seen the headlines talking about cyber war for years and years. Media loves the word cyber war. Every time there's an attack somewhere and some nation state is suspected to be involved, the headlines will speak about cyber war. Some website is down somewhere, it's cyber war. So there's a random botnet attack, it's cyber war. And most of those things are not cyber war. Because most of the attacks which are linked to foreign governments and to foreign nation states are espionage. It's about spying. Vast majority of the attacks that we attribute back to the Russian government or to the Chinese government or to the US government or to the British government are spying, including the attacks that the British government did against private companies in Germany and in Belgium 2 years ago. They were about espionage. And spying isn't war. Espionage isn't war. It's espionage. Clearly, espionage is more important during times of crises and during times of war, but by itself, it's not war. And if it's not war, we shouldn't call it a war. However, last December, on Christmas Eve's Eve, there was an attack in the city of Kyiv in Ukraine against a company called Prikarpatyab, this company. And this is a power company. They are in charge of maintaining the power grid, which covers most of Ukraine, including the parts of Ukraine which were lost to Russia in the conflict which started 2 years ago. And the attack here inside this organization started with one of the operators realizing, as he was sitting on his control system, that his mouse didn't work. He tried using his mouse and it didn't work. That's how it started. Mouse doesn't work. Maybe it's out of battery. Then he realizes that although his mouse doesn't work, the cursor is moving on the screen anyway. And this is a bad sign. Then they realized that the other operators sitting next to him had the same problem. They couldn't control their workstations, but someone else was controlling them. And then they were watching as this unknown attacker or unknown attackers were using their own workstations to turn off backup power and then starting to click on relays to turn off power in different parts of the grid until they saw them turning off the backup power and turning off the power in the building that the operators were in themselves, leaving the operators themselves in the dark. And this attack came from Russia. And Ukraine and Russia are at war. Russia doesn't call it a war, but clearly it is a war. And this wasn't espionage. This wasn't spying. This was a targeted attack against critical infrastructure in another country during a time of conflict. So I have a hard time calling this anything else than a cyber war attack. Now, the power didn't stay off forever. They actually recovered the power within a couple of hours. They couldn't do it with their computers because the attacker had overwritten the firmware on their control systems, turning their control systems into bricks, basically. But they did recover them manually by turning the relays by hand. So power was returned during the day. 200,000 people were without power, and this was in December. It can get mighty cold in Kyiv and around Ukraine in December. But they did recover. And while investigating this case, we learned that, in fact, the attack had already started 6 weeks earlier. It had already started in November. It had started when one of the operators inside the company had received an email which had an attachment, an Excel attachment, which explained to him that for you to see the content, you have to click the Enable Content button. So if you learned anything from my session today, it is that please do not click the button. Thank you very much.